Pause the video and think about how you would answer these questions. Is there a critical period for learning languages? Brian McWhinney of Carnegie Mellon University believes that there is no such thing as a critical period. He found out that there is an ingraining of information over time. Age effects in L2 learning emerge from entrenchment, competition, and weak resonance, but not because there is evidence of some age-specific language plasticity in the brain, McWhinney says. Another piece of evidence is provided by Catherine Snow and Marion Hofnagel-Hole from Harvard, who testified that the older a person is, the better they learn languages at all levels. Adults learn a second language better than children because they already have an established foundation on which to make logical connections to the new language. It is logical to assume that the younger a person is, the easier it is for them to become fluent in the language. This can be explained from the perspective of two important aspects: quantitative and neuropsychological. Learning a language in the early years gives students more time to practice, say bilingual education experts Thomas Wayne and Virginia Collier. By the time a person is 18, for example, language proficiency may differ if learning began either at birth or at age 13, 18 years of practice versus 5. But does this explain all the differences in fluency? Not really, because the other piece of the puzzle is in neuropsychology. The way the brain perceives information about language changes from age to age. Children raised bilingually from birth can normally operate each of their languages fluently, although the level of proficiency within languages may vary in each of the subskills of comprehension, speaking, reading, and writing. The amount of time devoted to each language has a direct correlation in the first years with the ability to use it effectively later. That is, the more quality time devoted to the target language, the more likely the speaker will have a high level of fluency. For parents who undertake the task of raising their children bilingually or multilingually, it is important to remember, fluency does not come without effort. The family strategy of approaching languages should be a conscious decision. Simply engaging a child in language is helpful, but does not engage the child in constructive play or learning and using age-appropriate vocabulary. When a child learns languages from birth, they effectively learn them as two first languages. Brain scans show that people raised bilingual from birth have both languages in the same area of the brain as monolinguals, while people who learn languages after the first 7 months or so actually use different areas to process sounds or generally do not perceive sounds that are not typical for their native language. Children use language as a set of patterns that regulate social life. This means that a child who is bilingual from birth learns to navigate the world through two social systems based on learned concepts that are presented in two languages. When a child does this from birth, they have the advantage of understanding one concept, but with two lenses on the world. This is a great advantage over children who become bilingual or multilingual after birth, because there are conflicting patterns that regulate social life. A monolingual who learns a new language later in life takes learned concepts about the world from birth and learns to represent them in two models or modes of understanding and expression. Let's say an 8-year-old native English speaker moves to Mexico. Noodle is no longer the concept that the child had before, it also now becomes fideo, the Spanish variant of noodle. Fideo comes with its own cultural baggage. It may be that fideo is prepared differently than noodles. They may have a different taste or smell. Fideo may look different, have different shapes than noodles, or be eaten under different circumstances. Noodles and fideo are two different concepts. But a child raised in two languages from birth perceives the concept of noodles fideo as one. Although the circumstances, shape or taste may differ, their understanding of the noodle fideo concept is simply more of a monolingual one. Noodles and fideo are not superimposed on each other, but rather are one. Being bilingual from birth makes learning about fideo different from simply accepting that noodles and fideo are the same concept in different wrappers. All people raised bilingual from birth learn to speak their languages, while only a few go on to learn to read and write. One of the strongest arguments in favor of raising children bilingual from birth is that the brain processes both languages as the first and the mechanisms for development follow natural pathways for language acquisition. At first this is somewhat disconcerting, But we now know that a child first perceives bilingualism as a single language, borrowing from one another, until they become aware of their separate domains, usually around the age of 2 to 4. When a child can begin to categorize languages, mom says noodle, dad says video, and then identify languages, mom speaks English, dad speaks Spanish, they begin to do what adults do, translate. However, by this time, the child may mix syntax and grammar, borrow vocabulary, and speak one of their languages at inappropriate times. This is absolutely normal. Main stages of language, 2 to 3 years, normal mixing stage 3 to 4 years, language marking 5 years and older, understanding the concept of translation 4 to 10 years, syntactic conservatism. Children raised in more than one language go through a normal mixing stage, between the ages of 2 and 3, when they use words and grammar from all their languages interchangeably and without interruption. This is accompanied by a separation of their language systems and a possible marking period, 3 to 4 years, when the child can actually name their languages. Although it usually starts with mum says it like that and ends with the child's ability to label their languages with a name, my teacher speaks French. At this stage, children begin syntactic conservatism and generally stick to a single grammatical structure while they strengthen their linguistic awareness of their languages. For example, a child can almost use English grammar in all their languages, English, Spanish and German, by the time she is 6 years old. It may subside for a while, but suddenly return, and when she is 9 years old, until she slowly breaks the habit. Although some estimates suggest that it may not last until age 10, it is more of a process that children must go through than a fixed age. In other words, some children probably have so much practice in their languages that they can stop clinging to one grammatical structure by the time they are 6, while others need a few more years to adjust to the correct transition between languages. One sign of this is that around the age of 5, children become aware of the translation concept and begin to do what adults do: think about what language they should use and then translate. These are general principles, and children may vary as well as time period in any direction. Learning foreign languages can seem like too high a goal for adults. The more we know about languages, the more difficult the task becomes. Fortunately, children don't know enough to be afraid. Children treat language like a code to be cracked or a game to be played. As in a game, children collect all the pieces they have at hand and make up the rules as they go. Once they start playing, they are corrected by their peers or parents and change these rules until they perfect their game. Learning to speak is a game in which the child is guided by parents, friends, and teachers. By the school time, the game becomes more complex, and while the rules never change, the level of difficulty does. In primary school, children may continue with imaginative play, but it slowly gives way to more formally structured games that can also lead to language improvement. There is a general consensus that topic-based foreign language curricula are more effective than traditional grammar curricula. This does not mean that grammar should not be taught, but rather that lessons should be built around conversational topics rather than grammar questions. Adults use the child's natural interest, and language becomes only a means of learning. In pedagogical terms, this means that the framework is based on two main ideas. Curricula should be based on systematic versus schematic knowledge in language learning and on a two-dimensional concept of language competence, including basic interpersonal, communicative skills and cognitive, academic language competence. This method guides learning through authentic activities in which students see immediate application to their learning. We've all heard, and probably said to ourselves, when will I apply this to my life? When children learn a new language, they need to see its immediate application, or benefit in order to maintain a high level of motivation for the task. While this is true for any subject taught in school, language has a distinct advantage over other fields in that our world is mediated by language, meaning that it is easy to apply in real life. As adults, many people who did not have the opportunity to learn a language earlier in life begin to realize the value of a foreign language during college. There is a growing demand for people in all professions who can communicate in other languages. Although this requirement is initiated by corporations, other professions, such as medicine and technical fields, also value multilinguals and value them highly for these skills. Traditional industries such as the diplomatic and military corps, translators, and teachers still encourage professionals in their fields to speak at least one language other than English. There is a huge demand for teachers willing to go abroad with foreign language experience. The trend towards international school growth is expanding and will continue to expand in the near future. Some students fear the prospect of learning a language late because they have heard that it will be difficult for adults if they did not learn another language as children. There is no doubt that there are different neural mechanisms that are characteristic of learners of different ages, as we discussed earlier, but linguists have actually proven that adults are much more successful than children at learning a new language. Such news is encouraging. Foreign languages can be learned throughout life. Each age group has different learning strategies that can be used to maximize potential, whether bilingual from birth or someone learning a new language in primary, middle, high school, university, or beyond. There are many reasons to start learning a foreign language early, but there is also evidence that regardless of your age, foreign languages are an achievable goal, as is lifelong multilingualism. If we pay attention to plurilingualism, there are more trilinguals whose languages have similar linguistic roots than those who learn unrelated languages. It is logical to assume that geography and historical roots go hand in hand. Most language families are close to each other, which makes learning them easier. For example, Hindi, Urdu, Bengali, and Nepali are all spoken in India, but they all share an Indo-Aryan root. It is not uncommon to find multilinguals who speak these languages. This is similar to how many Chinese speak a Chinese dialect, Tibetan, and Burmese, because all share Sino-Tibetan roots and can be found in geographically similar regions. So it would be more natural to find trilinguals speaking languages with a common root than trilinguals speaking languages with different roots. However, we know from experience that this is not always the case. Two modern factors, colonization and trade, changed the typical trilingual case. A number of countries have languages with different historical roots due to colonization. For example, Afrikaans and English are spoken in South Africa alongside native Sesotho and Zulu, and Japanese is spoken in Korea due to the former occupation. Colonial languages are often formal school languages in many countries, for example English in Kenya, French in Lebanon, Portuguese in Brazil or Dutch in the Netherlands Antilles, and although they are usually unrelated in a historical linguistic sense, they are related by socially historical events. Later language learning was influenced by trade rather than colonization. The current direction of globalization is that everyone speaks English because the largest consumer market in the world is the USA. Because of the need to be resourceful, and when the demands of relationships include learning a new language, most are forced to comply. Since the United States is the most powerful economic power in the world today, many people have learned English to gain access to American trading partners. In addition, the United States does not have a particularly high reputation for teaching foreign languages, which means that expecting Americans to learn other languages would probably be futile. There are 5 main scenarios to become multilingual. 1. Bilingual families living in a society where a third language is spoken. 2. Monolinguals living in bilingual multilingual communities. For example, an American journalist living in Belgium, where French, Dutch and German are spoken, feels that his/her life in Brussels requires knowledge of at least 2 of these languages in order to communicate socially and also professionally. 3. Multilingual schools. Hundreds, if not thousands, of international schools around the world teach local and international languages and often require a third language for graduation. For example, David, a native German speaker, goes to school in Japan, where he learns English and Japanese and has the opportunity to learn French. 4. Bilinguals moving to a community with a third language for work. For example, Louise, a Canadian, knew French and English before moving to Mexico for a job where she needed to improve her Spanish skills for a promotion. 5. Citizens of multilingual communities. Many countries are multilingual in their own right. For example, growing up in Lebanon, Hannah learned Arabic, English, and French as part of the primary school system. Similarly, Max grew up in Switzerland, where his first language was Swiss German, then French, and then English with the option of Italian. Factors that prevent polylinguality. 1. Obstacle from parents, teachers, peers. While multilinguals may make more initial mistakes than their monolingual counterparts, they still progress quickly and eventually excel. The initial stage of making mistakes may lead some parents or teachers to hinder further multilingual development. Also, Telling children that it is too difficult for them can lead to discouragement. 2. Artificial rather than real language experience. Successful learning comes from authentic communication. Using the language in real-life situations contributes to multilingualism. 3. Insufficient time for tasks. Language proficiency increases over time. Many parents and teachers give up on the idea of teaching their children a language before the necessary period of 5 to 7 years. Besides, there are only 24 hours in a day, whether you speak 1, 2, 3, or more languages. Freedom comes with practice, and practice takes time. 4. Perception of the status of a third language. Languages that have a higher status or social value are learned more quickly than lower status languages that have less demand in society. When the heritage language is not a priority, then ethnic minority languages may be lost when a new higher status language is learned. It is not uncommon for trilinguals to often neglect their native language in favor of an international one. 5. Transfer of negative international communication. A person who speaks more than one language may experience interference from one language while speaking another, and the possibility of this occurring is proportional to the number of languages the person speaks. The more languages, the greater the likelihood of confusion if the child is younger and/or if the education is not was conducted with a consistent strategy. 6. The quality of the native language or fluency in the base language affects the quality of subsequent languages. If the child has a weak language foundation, it can make it impossible to learn a new language fluently. Pause the video and think about how you would answer these questions.